Hey everybody, welcome back to Addiction and the Three Principles. I'm Greg Suki. I'm here with Harry Durbitsky, and today we have Jonelle Sims joining us. We're going to talk about homeless and addiction, which is actually a pretty near and dear topic to me because that's right now in the job that I'm in. I actually come into close contact with a lot of chronically homeless people, and addiction is definitely a big issue in that in that group of people. But Jonelle, I mean, she does so much for the three principles. She started selfishly at first, but she started procrastinationpublications.com, which is an excellent resource for three principles. I mean, anything you would want to know is there. And she does an excellent job on keeping that updated. So be sure to check that out, procrastinationpublications.com. Really anything you want to know about three principles, you can find the link there and get to learn it if you're new, or get a little bit deeper if you're not so new. But I'm definitely excited to get into this topic. I know Harry said he had a few words before we get to Jonelle.
Right. Jonelle and I kind of have a similar background in the sense that each of us stepped into a very little program and it grabbed our hearts. And the moment it grabbed our hearts, we started to notice how much we were learning from the experience. And that's what you'll experience too, Greg, as well, as you're in such a fantastic area. This is the area that the three principles actually is fairly weak in. They're strong in the psychological makeup of it, of what it's expressing, and hope, and then they want to charge a lot of money for it. And obviously, when you're involved in homeless or addiction, the money is a secondary consideration. You're doing it because you love it and because you see how much you can help people. And the best results of it is that you grow at an astronomical pace. If you want to grow, you work with the homeless and the addiction and in those areas. And if you want to get rich, you do the psychological concepts of the principles, and you charge a lot of money for it. And you sound good. You do it really pretty. But the growth in the spiritual sense comes from working because your heart is caught by what the mind has brought to it. And in our case, with Greg, he's doing this great project. I don't know exactly what it is, but just from the sound of it, Greg, let me tell you, you're in for a big treat. And when Jonelle and I started talking, we noticed what a treat we were in from these people who are so real, so human, and experiencing a tremendous amount of trauma. And that's a word I want to emphasize to people in the three principles. Don't discount that word as, oh, it's just thought. If you're going to get into that, you miss the boat totally. This is real stuff. I talking to a lady recently, and she's a young gal, and she was raped on the streets, which would be a common occurrence in the addiction or in the homeless world. I tell you, it's not just thought, it's trauma. And when the understanding that she needs to come to, the principles help, but only if the person who's applying it is walking hand in hand with the other person. If you're giving theory, I saw a lot of that in the school, in the conference, a lot of theory, a lot of book knowledge. But that's not the answer that Sid was pointing to. He was right, Scott. He was pointing to the spiritual nature, and you connect to the essence of what the person is experiencing. So if you recite book knowledge of the principles, you've got nothing, in my opinion. I mean, it sounds good, and it certainly sells good, but it isn't what Sid was talking about. And so one of the things, Jonelle and I met on Salt Spring. She was going to the school for the first time, and we're on a bus, and immediately we couldn't help but start laughing and liking each other and sharing. We had never met each other and so on, but we knew we immediately could feel the feeling. And then we both followed. She's in a crazy little city called Winnipeg, and I'm in Vancouver. And we both ended up in similar spots. So, Jonelle, I really take my hat off to what you're doing. It's very, very beautiful. And it is what Sid loved. He loved the poor, underprivileged people. I spent quite a bit of time with Dave Banks the last couple of weeks,
cool.
and he was telling me that's what Sid really liked.
Yeah.
So, with that, go ahead and go wherever you want with that.
Oh, thanks so much, Harry. Yeah, it's funny. One of the things that I often laugh about when I first met you on Salt Spring was you leaned over my shoulder because you were sitting right behind me, and you said, "Oh, were you going to 3P school?" And oh, well, yeah, I'm going to 3P school. So you said you were going to, and I thought, oh, what a coincidence. And then, I start telling you a bit about my experience, and it was just so funny that you didn't speak a lot about what your background was in the principles, so it's I kind of laugh at it because it's like this cheeky little gentleman who's kind of hiding his secrets from me, and I kind of think of you that way all the time. I remember back to that, oh, he could have told me a lot more than he did, but he didn't. And he just kind of let me discover it over time. And I just, I love that about you, Harry.
Yeah.
So I guess what would be helpful to understand what I do with the homeless is rooted in my experience of when I came across the principles. And I'll kind of put it in the way that I see addiction. So most of my life, I suffered a lot, and it was just with insecure thought. And I was perfectly fine when I was with people or working. And in fact, when I got together with people, I would laugh and have a good time. But when I got alone and got in my head and quiet, my thinking would rev up. And I'd feel really bad about myself. And so my addictions from a very young age became eating, sleeping, and watching TV. And I never got into alcohol or drugs or anything like that because they didn't make me feel better. And that's kind of what I see addiction as now, in light of what I understand of the three principles, is that it's not so much an addiction to something as it's just an addiction to wanting to feel better. And you find whatever way you can to feel better. And so in my 20s, when I was realizing that my eating, sleeping, and watching TV wasn't helping me feel better, I came across self-help. And I read my first self-help book, which was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's actually a lot of wisdom in that book. When I look back at now, I see a lot of wisdom in it. But it's still a thing about doing and having to achieve or reach a certain success or be something other than what you are. And I did self-help for about 25 years. And I read hundreds of books and took tons of programs. And I was also in a profession as a corporate trainer where all of this was really applicable. So I was kind of surrounded by it 24/7. But I just got to a point when I was in my early 50s and I just got fed up. I got fed up of trying. I got fed up of everything I did didn't stick. I still had the same behaviors I had when I was a little kid, that I wanted to change and I couldn't. And I just gave up. I thought, this is it. I'm just going to have to live with myself broken because I've been able to live all along. So I'm just going to have to live with myself the way I am and stop looking. So I made a decision. That's it. I'm giving up. I'm stop looking. And that's funnily enough, when I came across the principles. And it's kind of like, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear, And I was just watching a video. I came across someone who mentioned the principles, and I Googled the name Pransky, and I came across the Three Principles movies site. And I watched a few of the videos, and after about an hour, while I was watching them, by the way, I found them kind of funny because they really weren't very professional, and they were talking really slow. And I had all these ideas in my mind. Well, and it wasn't that I really didn't understand what it was. I was interested in it. And the fact that there was this guy from Salt Spring, Canada, I just thought, whoa, that's weird, and I'd been to Salt Spring before. And so it just kept me interested for whatever reason. But when I eventually got to the video of Jack Pransky, in one of his videos, he said, how can we take ourselves seriously in light of the fact that we're making it all up? And I didn't hear that in my head. I heard that somewhere else. I heard it deeply in my heart, deeper than anything I'd ever heard in my entire life before. And there was a physical experience for me of losing 200 pounds of weight, which now I equate to personal thinking. And I just felt all this freedom, and it seemed completely hilarious to me. Oh my God, we're all walking around with this thinking in our head, believing it's true. Like, the first thought that kind of came to my mind that was funny was, we could all be diagnosed as schizophrenics because we're all walking around with these crazy thoughts in our head, believing it's true. And looking at people in institutions and thinking that they're worse off than we are. I just saw the ridiculousness of it all. But the other thing that happened, which was probably even the deeper part of it, was that I had 3 days of what I would maybe describe as seeing through the eyes of God. And what happened was, there was nothing personal in my experience. I was experiencing the world with no conditions, with no expectations, with no attachment. I was experiencing it as if I was part of everything and everyone. And it was really strange because I've had experiences of personal love all my life, my family, my friends, my past boyfriends, my husband. And I realized that those feelings that I had for everyone wasn't true love. I realized all of those feelings of personal love were personal. They had conditions. I would feel sad if they died. I would feel hurt if they didn't love me in return. And this love wasn't at all like that. It was really oddly detached, but 10 times more powerful and all-encompassing of everything with no conditions. So I saw that everything was perfect exactly as it was. And what happened for me at the same time was we had some neighbors that were suffering and causing us a lot of fear and stress. We were even thinking of planning on selling our house because the situation was so bad, because they were dealing with drugs and alcohol and prostitution, and they were really, really suffering. And when I had this experience, I realized, oh my God, there's nothing for me to fear. I realized that I am them and they are me. I understood that they were simply suffering from insecure thinking. It feels real and they just want to feel better. And so they're doing everything they can just to try to feel better. And because I had that experience at the same time that I had this 3 days of whatever it was, I realized, oh, this is where I want to work. These are the people that I want to see this, because their suffering is so profound. And if they were just to even get a little glimpse of it, then they would get some freedom from the suffering that they have. And they would have everything that they need to be able to live a life of not suffering in whatever way that is. And it doesn't have to be that they need money. It's not in the form. It's not in what they have or what they do. It's discovering something deep inside themselves about who and what they are. and how we're all connected. We're all one. We're all of this energy that you can't explain. You can't talk about it. You can just get a glimpse of it. You can just feel it in some way. So that is what drove me to, the first time I reached out, I wanted to go, it just occurred to me, well, I'll just reach out to a homeless shelter. And because I'm a corporate trainer, I know how to do workshops, I've done hundreds and thousands of them, so, and I'm familiar with working with groups. So I just went to a local homeless shelter and I offered this understanding. The funny thing is the guy had no idea what I was talking about. I could see it. I could see it. But he said, well, we're looking for things for people to do. And obviously he felt comfortable with me. So he said, okay, come down and do it. So they were just looking for an opportunity for people that go to the hangout, or the shelter, just to hang out during the day. They've got nothing to do. So they were looking for programs and so on. So I started doing them, and I did my first one, and I did it using my comfort zone of having a flip chart and planning for it, and giving a list of things that I wanted to say. I'd also taken a bit of training from people who've been in this understanding for a long time, so I knew that I shouldn't over prepare. I should kind of be ready just to take the conversation where it goes. And there was a lot of things that went wrong just in the shelter on that day. I couldn't do it in the classroom, and so we were out in the hallway and a bunch of people were coming in and out, and so a lot of things went really bad. But there were some people who I saw got a little bit of something out of it, and a few of them have come back a few times since then. But since then, I've learned that this has got nothing to do with me showing the principles to them. This has got everything to do with me learning more and gaining a deeper understanding of the principles, so that I don't go there to teach anymore. I just go there to hang out and meet people and see if I can have them relax a little bit in some way, hear their stories, and just simply love them. And there's lots of times where it's just a conversation, and we get to hang out for a bit, and they get to feel better for a bit because someone's willing to listen to them, and they get to relax and not feel judged and not looked at as if they need to be fixed. And so it's an incredible lesson for me, because it is so easy for me to get into my teaching mode and my judging mode and my I gotta fix them mode. It's this constant dance that I'll notice, when I'm in my head and back in my heart, and I'm in my head and I'm back in my heart. And it's just been it's been an incredible experience, because there are so many horrific stories that I hear that are, like you said, Harry, trauma. People being tortured with descriptions of what that is, and rape and abuse and neglect and like just horrific stuff that people have been through. And yet at the same time, I can see that they're perfectly fine despite that. That the core of them has not been touched in any way, and that they just need to see that. And frankly, I have absolutely no idea how that happens. I can't see any pattern to it. I don't, I know some teachers will talk about, kind of giving tips and how we do this to get people to gain their own insights. But I can't see a pattern. I know sometimes when I'm really in my head, people will hear things. And sometimes when I feel like I'm in the best state of unconditional love, they don't hear a damn thing. So I don't know. I just know that I keep showing up. I just keep showing up.
That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, Jonelle, is we're actually not doing it. We're being blessed by the fact that it's an experience that we're there with, but it isn't because we're there. It's a more like the Spirit has brought two people together to share something special together. Yeah. And it isn't a sufferer and a helper that's brought together. It's, I need this, and so do you.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many times where the learning comes in some of the stories that they share. There's a couple of them that have profoundly affected the way that, and reinforce what I saw when I had that 3-day experience. It's kind of like I had that experience and I can't find words for it. And no matter how many times I try to explain it, it doesn't explain it, But I find these other stories through other people that kind of point back to that. And one of them was, I had a group of 3 or 4 people in there, and we were talking about all sorts of things. And I think I brought up at some point that I was a teacher or had been a trainer. And I don't know if that's what sparked this gentleman's website, insight. What am I saying? Insight. But he was kind of quiet throughout the whole thing and had dark glasses and a hat on, so I couldn't really make eye contact with him, and I really couldn't tell what was going on. But all of a sudden, he just lifted up his head and he said, I just realized I've been a teacher all my life. I even taught my mother how to be a good mother. And that just touched me so profoundly because, oh my God, even when we're children, we're teachers. I go around thinking because I'm an adult, I can teach people to things, And then I saw, oh my God, as infants, we're the most profound teachers, We know nothing of the world of form. And here we are being the most informative teachers that anyone could be about the truth of life, So I'll hear, that one just comes up all the time when I realize, or if I get caught up in my head about doing something right or doing something wrong, I just, that's one that keeps on coming to me. Another one was a girl who has, I met early on and I've seen quite a few times since then. She's still homeless, but she tried to commit suicide 9 times. And after the 9th time, she got a personal insight. And her insight was that if God wasn't going to let her die, then she needed to find a way to get over the trauma of her past. And instead of fighting with her, instead of not listening and instead of resisting the work that she was getting with her counselor that she was working with, she decided to work with them and let go of her resistance and listen. And it made a big difference for her, and she got a lot better, and she's living in a much better space than she was before. But this one story that she told me is another one that keeps coming to me all the time that just blows my mind. So she had someone reach out to her. She's in her 50s now, and she had someone reach out to her that hadn't talked to her in 30 years. Or she had 2 people. So the first guy reaches out to her, and he used to be some sort of a social care worker that worked with her when she was young, as a teenager or younger. And he said, I just wanted to reach out to you to thank you. And she's going, what? What do you mean, thank me? Like she remembered who he was. And he said, you were so difficult to deal with when you were young that you broke me. And I realized I wasn't cut out to be a social worker. And because of that, I've gone on to being a really successful lawyer and land developer. And he's a really famous lawyer and land developer here in Winnipeg. And he realized that the most critical, important thing that happened in his life was meeting her, in the worst of her state of mind. So another guy, same thing, around the same time, reaches her, and she doesn't get who it is off. And then eventually, after talking to him for a bit, she realizes who he is. And he says, I just wanted to reach out to you to thank you. And she says, well, what for? And he was a social care worker that took care of her when she was this awful kid. And he said, you were so difficult to deal with that I realized if I could handle you, I could handle anybody. And he went on to all sorts of work in addiction and in Vancouver and building all sorts of centers for the homeless and the addicted. And he's now working in addiction to gambling out in Vancouver. And that story is just, it almost comes up in my head every day because it reminds me about how our learning comes from everywhere and in everything. And we can get the most profound insights from what seems to be the worst situation, So it kind of lets me off the hook. I can kind of go into the shelter and see those people and be whoever Jonelle is on that day, And sometimes I'm so up in my head, and other times I'm much closer to the formless, to the unconditional, to the impersonal.
One of the things that I've noticed, Jonelle, in working with the heavily addicted in the little program, one of the little programs that I'm doing, is I have a desperate urge or need to share the best that I have inside of myself, because anything less feels like I'm being cheap. Because the opportunity of just sharing something that would help these people understand that the moment they release anything inside of themselves, they're allowing me to soar with the eagles. They're allowing me to get into a feeling. And that's something I noticed when the people are suffering so much, that the opportunity to get into an incredible feeling is like they soar because they have so much gratitude and so much suffering. And they take me into the abyss of beauty. But I notice it with the three people, the two others we're all giving it everything we have. And we're disappointed, to be honest, if we get into this versus getting into the good stuff. And the good stuff means they're expressing and opening my eyes up to what the world of spirit and the world of love is. I guess the world of love is. And I guess when I walk away, I feel more love. I can't help it. It's so strange because you would think that would be the last place in the world we would look for love. Yeah. Because it's, Greg's walked a lot of times in it. And I bet, Greg, sometimes you shook your head at how much love was available in these desperate situations.
Oh, definitely. And it's kind of funny because when I first started kind of working with people, I thought I had to have this like set, curriculum going through. And I'd always start out with something, well, there's these 3 principles and, kind of go through the whole spiel. Never seemed to really get through to anybody. It wasn't until I dropped that and just showed up with no expectations in mind that things just started coming to me. you know, like, it kind of surprises people when I get together with them that I start by talking about what they do for work and what they like to do for fun and stuff like that. Because it's kind of like, and we talked about this on the last program, how Robin Williams knows that when he gets up on stage, he's going to have an insight, he's going to be inspired, but it may not happen right away. So he prepares and he has some jokes that he starts with and he kind of gets rolling, and then eventually his insights kick in and he's off and running. And anybody who's seen him live you can't help but laugh. You know what I mean? So it's I don't really want to call it a technique, but I guess it kind of is. But just starting with that general stuff and then letting the insights kick in and just letting it flow where it goes has really made all the difference. And the work that I'm doing now, I do maintenance on a couple of apartment buildings, and it's permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless people who've been diagnosed with mental illnesses. And probably 90% of them are also dealing with drug addiction. And, it's obviously not my official job to really be talking to them about addiction, but it just comes up. And it shows itself. Like it was funny, one time I got a work order from a resident who was complaining that his bathroom exhaust fan was rattling and making noise. And, I get up on a ladder and I open up the cover and a crack pipe falls out. He'd totally forgotten that he hit his crack pipe up there, and it was up there vibrating on the cover. And it opened it up to this conversation because he was afraid. He thought I was going to call the police or, turn him in. And instead, I just ended up having this wonderful conversation with him. And I watched him, that was about a year ago. And I watched him over this past year getting more and more clean time under his belt.
Yeah.
He still goes back to it from time to time, but he's going farther and farther and longer in between using. And we still have these conversations from time to time. And it's just this beautiful thing because it's so organic. It's not something that can be forced. It's not, there's no program that you can go through to teach you how to make people have insights. It just doesn't work that way. And to me, that's the beauty of it, because that would be boring. Just to sit there and go through the same thing every time. And, yes, it'd be great that people have insights, but it would just be boring. There's a certain beauty to the randomness of it.
Yeah, there is.
Steve, how do you see stepping into, from this ordinary into the spiritual? Steve also works with homeless more in England, and I think so anyway. And how do you see that, Steve? Did he?
Yeah, I'll just figure out how to unmute myself. I love the conversation that's been shared, because I think homelessness is just a title that we've given to define a group of people.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in that defining, we get lost. I think it's a client group that it certainly has complex needs. And sometimes they get lost within those complex needs, so that the individual, never mind the spirit, is lost within.
Yeah.
But, when you were talking, I kept on hearing the Mother Teresa saying, love them anyway. And I think that's really what Tony and I have always done when we've gone along.
Yeah.
Apart from starting off with the groups that we've done of kind of saying what times we'll be there, then it's over to them. And that's normally a little bit of a shock, because they're used to being told, you need to be here, you need to be doing that, your money will get stopped. And it's all this on top of survival, really, day to day. So to answer your question, Harry, it would be love them anyway. And I think when you turn up with that in your mind, then you can't help but love them anyway. And I think that I know that we've seen many teachers appear in front of us when they've started sharing, where they've started taking the groups just from where they're coming from. and the energy of the group rising. So I think when we go along there and let the titles go and just see soul to soul what's really happening, that there's not the titles of what they're defined. If you see the person that's there, then amongst anything that's going on, when you're saying about insight, I think we're built for insight. We're constantly getting insight. But obviously our level of consciousness and thought at that time is whether it really gets through to the moment. But I think when someone sees that they're actually built for insight, and in that insight they're not damaged or broken, then it really allows them to start seeing themselves in the moment. So then the spirit begins to awaken even more clearer. There was one woman that came to mind, and she wanted to be a reflexologist. So she started doing that, but part of her mindset that she took with her was to put her brown envelopes, which is bills here, in the drawer. And she got herself into a little bit of difficulty that her electricity, she managed to get herself into accommodation. And like her electricity would be cut off, and it was coming up to Christmas. And she was so excited that she'd finally got this small building that she could invite someone around for Christmas, and here was the electricity. And she was walking home feeling so sorry for herself, and she thought, my bill's £75 and I've only got 30. But she says something inside of her made her turn round and go to the office and be straight with them and say, I can't give you everything what you need. And the woman behind the counter says to her, because you've been truthful, I'll give you a grant for the rest.
Wow.
So
Beautiful. Isn't that a loving story?
Absolutely.
Oh,
She just
love it.
Her mind got caught. She thought, oh, no, I'm going to cut off. It's going to be the worst Christmas of my life. But despite that, something turned her around, and she started walking back into town. Went up and says to the woman, and the woman says, I'll give you a grant. And she had many stories like that, where she started just seeing where she was getting stuck. And part of her stuck was living in the homelessness cycle. We've had people come to our groups who were maybe homeless a number of years ago, but still living in that psychological terror of it happening again. Again, just seeing them as people, just allow them to be who they were born to be.
You know, and what you're saying about love them anyway, I can't help but love them. You know, I mean, it's like it's like the most loving place I go to, and they feel that, but they just throw it like a kid, like a baby. They just throw it back at me, and it just pours out of my heart, and I'm amazed. Like, I'm not consciously making an effort to love them, but all of us can't help but we're excited to go there. We wonder what it's going to be like. And if one person shows up, it's better than if 10 show up. But if 10 show up, it's better than, it's just always a perfect, unpredictable evolution that we're dealing with. And the ability for it to pull feelings into where we all join together into one universal collective consciousness, I don't know a better feeling in the world than that.
Chris?
Yeah, I've just had an insight. It's really interesting for me to listen to this talk and Jonelle, because several years ago, I was working on a project with people who were disadvantaged or diagnosed or criminal, all kinds of problems, and we had a huge success. I worked together with Doris, my partner, and at one point we said hello to people that we really meant it, and we started giving hugs and they had to be there, all kinds of threats if they didn't come to this course, and well, we said, okay, yeah, you come here, and if you come, we'll we'll serve you some coffee, that kind of thing. Because before that it was kind of like you'll have to pay for the coffee, and but we just made it really nice and cozy, and change started happening, and we had this. And it was this, we were hearing some of our colleagues saying that they were so stressed and so hard. In this group of people, you can't do anything. And we had this feeling that we were just smiling. But this is before I ever heard of Sydney Banks.
Yeah.
I didn't have a spiritual kind of episode in my life before this. And what I'm just realizing by listening to this is that you can't attribute love to or God to Sydney Banks.
No.
It's always been there, and it's what we're made of. So because I've also had a period where I was kind of, now is this really Sydney? Is this really the principles, or getting up in my head, as you were saying? Starting to think too much about stuff, and you, instead of just being in it or doing whatever you had this checklist. Are you really doing this? Are you doing this the right way, or instead of just being natural and being who you are, and feeling love, as you say, Harry? It's so beautiful because that's what it is. And I've had a tremendous experience meeting 3P and being in Salt Spring myself also, and wow. But of course, this is a universal thing, and for me, that listening to you just made me say, get real and relax and just be a nice person, be nice, and then you start being helpful. You can't help being but being helpful if you're really in your heart. So I don't know, but that was just my words here. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Jonelle.
Yeah.
You and I are lucky in the sense that we have books donated from Sydney Banks into our little programs.
Yeah.
Could you sort of give us a little insight of how you see that play out in the helping of addiction and helping of homeless? It's funny, homeless and addiction go together, and yet homeless to me is a little bit more complicated than addiction, because it includes addiction and about 62 other things. And when I taught homeless, I was bewildered. It was like, this one had this problem, and this one had this other problem, this one had this problem, and I said, I can't. Where's those common ground that, of course, what Chris was alluding to, when you're just sharing and talking, you're trying to find a common feeling with it, and I honestly struggled with that, and loved it when I ran back to the addiction and went, oh, at least I could just talk about addiction, type of thing. And so how do you see sort of the books have made a big difference in my program, but we're not interested in talking about that. How do you see that play out with the advent of what Sid really, in his deathbed, he basically said to Chip and Elsie, get my books out to people who cannot afford to buy it. I want my books to help those in situations like that. And that's one of the reasons the school was established, besides keeping the purity of the principles. And it has made a big difference in my program, I will say that. But I'd more like to hear that from you.
I love that I have the books, because in a way I kind of feel like I am just the distributor of Sydney Banks books. I am the tool that gets them out there. And if that's the best that I could do, then that's just perfect. But I don't know what is happening with the books, but I just know that they're out there. I did have one very specific thing that happened. So I've given away probably about 200 of Sid's books in my 150 sessions that I've done at the homeless shelter. And I did have
Wow,
one.
150. Wow.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot.
You're a
so-
veteran.
I had one guy who had come to one session, and he was within a group of 2 or 3 others, I think, that we got into a good conversation. It doesn't always happen because a lot of, like you said, the homeless are struggling with all sorts of things, and many of them are have all sorts of mental disabilities, so they can't speak properly. I find it very hard to understand a lot of them. It's just barely getting in any conversation at all is sometimes the best that I could do. You know, if I see them calm down a bit, then yay, today I got them to calm down a bit. So anyway, we did this one day have 3 or 4 people, and it was a really good conversation. I had people who could be articulate and could explain their situations and were fairly high functioning, but in homelessness and experiencing, as the homeless do, a million different obstacles in trying to navigate their life and things that keep on getting in the way. So this one guy came in, and I ended up asking him if he wanted to take a book, and so he took the missing link. And then I didn't see him for about 3-4 months maybe. And one day he came back in again, and he didn't say anything at first, and he was just part of the conversation. Then about halfway through, he said, "I have a story I want to share with you." And I said, "Oh." And he said, "I've been reading this book." And he said, "It's so amazing." He says, "It's the truth of life." And he's been speaking differently and acting differently with his family, and they've been asking him questions about it. And he says to them, you know, he tries to explain it to them, and he says they don't really understand, but he keeps just telling them, well, this is the truth of life. And his family knows that there's something to it because they've seen such a change in him, you know, and so they're curious about it. So I know he's sharing it with his family. And one of the things that happened was he's still homeless, and he's living at a shelter with the Salvation Army. And he was really sick. Part of the reason why I hadn't seen him for a while was he got a really bad cold, and super, super sick, like was just could not get rid of it. And he was doing everything. He was taking all sorts of medication. He's a native, so he'd gone to a sweat lodge, and you know, he was just trying everything, and nothing was working, and he was just so fed up. And he had been reading the missing link, and he'd already gotten some things from it. And then one time, when he was about to go to bed one night, he just all of a sudden remembered what his father had told him one time. His father had said to him to not allow life to happen, something like allow life to happen. And he understood what that meant in that moment. He realized what his father was pointing to, and he realized that what he was doing with this cold was he was constantly fighting it. He didn't want it. He was doing everything to resist it. And he realized that it was no longer in his hands. He had done everything that he could do to try to get better, and it was no longer in his hands. And so he kind of looked up and he said, "Okay, God, give it to me. I'll take it." You know, he understood what his father had said to him, and just allow life to happen. So he did that. I'm going to allow life to happen. And he went to bed that night, and he woke up in the morning, and he was perfectly fine. No signs of his sickness, no signs of his cold, completely healthy, really vibrant, happy. And the guy sleeping in the bed next to him said to him, "What is going on? Like, what happened?" And "My God, you were so sick. I thought you were going to die. Like, why are you so much better today?" And he explained the story about how he realized what his father had been telling him, and then what it meant, and how he kind of allowed himself to surrender to life, to surrender to God, to surrender to whatever it is. And in that, he gained freedom from it. And so the guy next to him said, so if I just let go, if I just surrender, then I'll get out of this situation that I'm in. And I could tell this was really cool. He said, no, you can't just say, I'm going to give it up, or I'm going to let go, or I'm going to surrender. You have to believe it. You have to see it. So it was like, oh my God, that's so cool. You know, because you know that he saw something deeper than just he saw beyond the words, you know? And it was just so cool. So it was like one good little story. That's the beautiful thing, actually, that I get out of this more than anything is I do this all voluntarily. And so my husband is basically supporting me going to work so that I can go to the homeless shelter and bring him home stories. Which is
perfect.
It's a good trait.
Yeah. So every day he'll, you know, after my sessions on Thursday, I go to 2 different places. And
it's true what you say. It's true what you say that not only do we feel the love, but we're just thrilled by seeing someone coming in with such a stressed out feeling, and all of a sudden this beautiful feeling of not of hope, but knowledge or wisdom pours out of this person, and they see they have the answer, and they're living it right now. It is inspirational, I must admit. And
you know,
one of the reasons I love this so much is it's so obvious when a person is totally stuck in a world, in that world, and when they let it go. Is that how you see it, Steve? Do you see it like that as well? Just to get him going. Yeah, get the motor going.
Yes.
Excuse me. Succinct, clear, precise. Yeah. Yeah, it touches my heart because Sid always, you wondered what motivated Sid, and that was it. The stories he told of a guy who lost his legs, and he was talking to him in a homeless shelter, and he was saying, what I got is more valuable than if someone gave me another pair of legs. I mean, he was crying. Sid was crying from that experience. And I don't cry, but, you know, I just feel privileged and honored to be able to be with these people. And I don't, like, life is pretty easy for me. I need to see there's another side to life. And it's not that hard to solve, but it's also not that pretty to see, you know. And you know, when I just talked to a young girl who was raped 2.5 years ago and still suffering from it. She's not feeling too pretty about it. And but you can't help it. Oh man, you know, as a father, you can't help but go, that's my daughter who's gone through that type of experience. And I'm a better human being because of it. I'm a better human being because when Greg told me his story, it inspired me. I'm a better human being because, Jonelle, when you showed so much lightness and effervescence working in this situation, someone might think you're in the circus having a good time, you know, type of thing. You know?
Well, I am, really.
Stop cheating. Get serious.
Can I just see?
Yeah.
Can I just say something on the stories though? Because I think where I've kind of seen people become a little bit where they may not understand that is, I think the beauty of what Jonelle is sharing, and where I'm resting as I'm listening to her, is she's coming from her truth. So it's not just a story. Let me just tell you a story for the sake of telling you a story. And I think when you speak from your experience of an insight that you may have been with someone when they've heard you listening, then it's the insight, it wakes the feeling, soul to soul, person to person. So it's then what Sid would say, beyond the words. And the reason why stories can be really amazing when we're sharing is because when we're resting in that space, that's what wakes people up. It's not the story. Yeah. It's the feeling between one another. Yeah. It begins to, and we see, and it's one of the things that's really been coming to me this last month. And I knew it, but again, as I'm hearing it differently, that we're really not that different at all. And if we stop seeing ourselves as being separate from one another, then the feeling that naturally flows between us all is there. And then the stories become even more magical because they then become your story that wakes up inside of you. And then you share that. And that's what I heard beautifully when Jonelle was saying about the guy who went, and even though he couldn't really describe it, what he was taking to his family was the feeling. Mm-hmm. They could feel that he was different. They could see that he was different. And that's the mysticism I feel that Sid pointed to, is when we start seeing each other from there, rather than maybe the dysfunction that society kind of sees us in. When we see each other from there, then we join in the one big story of love. And we all just resonate from that space. And then there is no separation. There just is that moment. And then the story of the native guy, again, Jonelle, was beautiful, of him waking up to his truth. Mm-hmm. And then it just seems so simple. It's like, why didn't I think of that before? But in that moment, it's just like, it just all makes perfect sense. Yeah. Yeah. So stories are beautiful when they come from our truth. And we resonate in that truth. And it's truth that evolves us, not our stories. Yeah. It's the truth of where we're coming from, and we're sharing those stories that people really hear. And that's what I, like, if you go back to, if everyone asked themselves it, for me, that's how I'm sharing the principles. Because when I heard Sid, I didn't want to listen to Sid at the beginning, but the feeling that I got was so clear, it woke me up. Then it was no longer about Sid. It was me, how I was hearing what Sid takes out to us. And there's all the beautiful stories that Jonelle's sharing of those people waking up. Beautiful.
That is beautiful, a beautiful story about how he finally understood something that he had carried in his consciousness from his father. And that moment when it broke through and he connected with the truth of it, he also connected with the truth that I'm not a victim. Life isn't really trying to punish me. There's no God up there trying to punish me. It's life happening, and these things happen that don't look like they're fair, that they don't look like they have a reason. But when he opened up to it, it was a huge lesson. So there was a reason to it.
I'd like to comment on the feeling that, you're all talking about. We have, at our Three Principles group, there's a lady that comes, and she's about, 82 or 83. Greg knows her, Pam. And she doesn't really say much. She had a stroke a little while ago and came back from it, but she doesn't say a whole lot. But we're sitting there, and whenever you look at her, she has this big smile on her face, and you can tell she's just so full of peace and things. And at the end of the meeting, every time we go over and hug her, she says, "I just love coming here. I feel so good whenever I'm here." And that's kind of what it's about. And other people look at her, and you can see that feeling. It's so beautiful. And that's really, it's all about the love and the connection. And any way that gets you there is good.
And I think that's what Jesus was getting at when he said, where two or more are gathered and in accord. That accordance is no one is judging or thinking this person is less than or suffer, a victim, whatever. When two people are gathered and in accord, there shall be the Christ consciousness and the love,
That's it. Actually, that is it. With all of what Steve and Jonelle and all of us are talking about is exactly that. What a privilege to be in accord and to live with these. I love what you said, Steve, about it, that we're really just the personification of an image of who we are. And that really does make it easy to connect in an ordinary way. And I was talking to that woman, I could feel my own suffering.
Yeah.
And that was helpful.
This was absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Jonelle, for joining us today.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And for sharing what you're up to, because that's really what this is about. Is just, I have people telling me I should be charging for this. And it just doesn't feel right.
I know. Yeah. If and when it does, you will. And if it doesn't, that's okay too.
Yeah, I'm perfectly okay with that. I'd rather see this get out to more people than for me to make a few bucks.
Well, it's the same message that Jonelle and we've had this is because you do it because it allows us to step deeper into the feeling of love. And I can't get enough of that. And I love the quietness that it represents, the ability to step into the silence. And the more love I feel in my heart, the less I want to hear what my little mind is talking about. It is an annoyance that is easy to push away when I feel that I'm sharing love with people. And I'm feeling and hearing them. And enjoying them, which I kind of like to do. Yeah.
So how can people get a hold of you, Jonelle?
Just via my website. So it's the www.procrastinationpublications.com. And it's got my email and my email address is on there for them to reach out to me.
Great. And that is, like I said in the beginning, that is an excellent resource. If you're looking for anything 3P related, that's the place to go, let me tell you.
It's got a bunch of stuff.
Well, I'm back to what I have to do. See you guys later, eh?
Yeah,
All right, take care, everybody. Thanks again.
Okay. Nice to see you, Steve, again.
Thanks,
Spent
everybody.
2.5 days with Steve. Fantastic
Oh,
guy.
nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
So lovely.